Welcome to the Meat and Potatoes podcast. We're here with Christopher McBeth, who is the artistic director for the Utah Opera, and Mark Campbell, who's librettist, book writer for The Revolution of Steve Jobs Opera. How are you guys?
Great.
Doing great, thanks.
Thank you for having us here.
You bet. Thank you for being here. Mark, you're from New York.
Yeah.
And Christopher, you're local here.
I am. 25 years going.
Wonderful. So these are always fun because we get out of the lane of like talking about entrepreneurship and building businesses, but there's going to be a lot of similarities with what we're going to talk about. And we are talking about something that's very cool because it weaves in a well-known entrepreneur, Steve Jobs, with singing and artistic resonance, right? Give us a quick rundown of where did this idea come from and what has been your role in it?
Well, the Revolution of Steve Jobs was the idea of the composer Mason Bates. We wrote this opera together. Mason Bates is kind of famous in many ways, but one thing is he's a DJ, and he's been very successful at marrying electronic music with the orchestra sound. So that's what he's known for, and so he actually chose the idea of Steve Jobs as a subject for an opera. When he told me, I was like, oh, God, no. I don't know how to do this, mostly because everyone has their own version of this man. So it's very hard to create a story that would become universal. But we worked very closely together, and I think we came up with something that's quite exciting and also very new for the opera house.
Yeah. All right. I have a billion questions. We won't be able to get to those.
Oh, why not? Come on. Let's just go on for hours. It's okay.
So in this room at this table, these microphones, we discuss like the nuances of building a business, right? And there's a lot of ways to skin that cat. You can raise money, you can not raise money, you can go fast, you can go slow. I have a pretty good idea of how to do that. With this, it's all net new for me. So do you guys sit in the same room? Do you have like videos of Steve Jobs? Is there like a mood setting for you to like put the words with the music? I'm so interested in how this actually works.
Well, as in most contemporary opera, which this is, although that sounds like a dirty word often, but this is not that kind of an opera. It's a very audience-friendly opera. Someone once said it's a user-friendly opera. The idea, Mason Bates came up with the idea and said, I want to write an opera about Steve Jobs. And it was basically, go. So I did my research, starting with the Walter Isaacson book, as everyone has read. And, you know, you read that book, it takes like a day and a half to read because it's just, he writes it so well and it's just very direct. And then I did a lot more research into Steve Jobs' life and then created the libretto. Mason and I worked a little bit together on the libretto, things that he thought might be missing from the story that he would like included. A few phrases that he wanted included. We did not sit in the same room. Mason lives in San Francisco. I live in New York. Everything was pretty much done by email. And there were lots of emails. I mean, probably about 3,000 emails between us, and or text messages. And we just would work on it scene by scene, and then it was done. It was produced by the Santa Fe Opera in 2017, has gone to many opera companies in this country and is going to many more. And now it is in Utah, which I'm very excited about. I'm really, really proud to have it here.
Yeah. What an amazing process. And
it's when a collaboration, well, this is true of business.
Yeah.
When the collaboration goes great, nothing's better when you're having an exchange of ideas and you both are trying to tell the same story or create the same product or solve the same problem. It's the most exciting thing. Yeah. When it goes the other way, it's not quite so much fun, but that didn't happen with this project.
Yeah. So opening night is going to happen, right? And what is that like for you to see those 3,000 emails and text messages up on stage?
It's always exciting because I write for my audience. I want my audience to like what I write. They have just spent a fortune to be there. Not a fortune, it's actually affordable, but they could be home, plopped in front of their TV with their beer or whatever, watching that. Instead, they made a choice to go and see something new, something that is different. And so my responsibility as a writer is to ensure that they are moved, that they have a good time, and that they might have a little message. When they leave the theater, they go home feeling something different, something new, which I believe opera can do because of music. not necessarily because of words, but because opera is such an amazing art form and such an exciting art form, and because we are creating new operas every day that deal with the American experience, and because opera companies like Utah Opera is choosing to produce them, we are reaching new audiences. So it's nothing but exciting for me. And so when I hear that first laugh, or I hear someone next to me even kind of like tear up, I love it. It's why I do it.
All right, last question, then we'll jump over to Christopher.
Yeah,
Well,
he's got a
for
much better voice than I do. They must be tired of my New York nasal.
Do you sit in the back? Do you sit in the front? Are you too nervous to watch?
I'm too nervous to watch, so I try to sit to the side. Back in the days, I will admit this, back in the days when I smoked cigarettes, I would do the cliche thing of going out in the lobby and smoking a cigarette and then peeping my head in. I can't do that anymore. I mean, now I'm really dating myself in terms of years. But I don't like to sit right in the middle. I like to sort of sit to the side. And if I can just watch, if I can lean against a wall, that's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, really cool. All right, Christopher, as the artistic director of the Utah Opera, let's start with what does that job mean for you? And then the second question, if you forget it, I'll ask again. How did you guys get this opera into our community?
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer. The best way to explain it is probably like a movie producer, quite honestly. I think about what our audience is looking for, and it's usually a mix of things that we call standard repertoire, but there need to be discovery pieces. And certainly the Revolution of Steve Jobs falls into the latter category. We had the great privilege in January of 2020 to work with Mark for the first time with Utah Opera, with another opera based on the Christmas Eve truce during World War I called Silent Night. And shortly after that, Mark sends me a note via email. He says, there's a production being built of the Revolution of Steve Jobs, and I think it'd be great for your audience. If Mark, someone of his stature, says I need to take a look at something, you can bet I will. I did immediately and fell in love with not only the piece, but the direction of this new production, which that means a new director, a new set, new costumes, a fresh look at the piece from the first production that was out there. And I immediately had discussions then with one of my colleagues who was directing the piece and runs another opera company. And we like to collaborate. We can make things bigger and better if a bunch of companies throw in their financial resources. And so that's what this particular production represents. So that's sort of answering both of your questions, I think.
Love it.
As part of the process, when Utah Opera came aboard, they were still fleshing out some directions of what the stage would look like, exactly how it would work in the theater, some of the transition pieces. And I loved coming in on those because we all got, at that point, it was still COVID was a thing. So we're all on Zoom looking at each other in Brady Bunch boxes. And Mark was there. And one of the things I love about Mark is he comes to this while he is one of the most celebrated wordsmiths of our opera form. His background isn't necessarily steeped in the operas of the 18th, 19th, even 20th centuries. He comes to this as very much a contemporary storyteller. And I remember one moment, because there's several scenes in Steve Jobs' life that are represented in this. And at one point, he just kind of did the thing that you see in movies. He kind of went, yeah, I don't get it. And it was simple. It was about being in the garage of Steve Jobs, which magically had moved somewhere on stage.
Oh, that's right.
And he said, the last time we saw it was over here, and now it's over here. And that just doesn't make sense to me. And I love the fact that he brings that sensibility of a contemporary theater goer and a non-theater goer. In some cases, I think that's what he also represents, is someone who expects this needs to make sense.
Yeah. Very cool. Man, I'd like to be a fly on the wall for how you guys do this whole thing. Because it does have a lot of similarities of, startups and businesses, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
You're pitching each other. You're saying yes or no. You're inking deals. You're syndicating with other opera houses. Right. Trying to improve margins, all of that. But there's the artistic side. And I bet there's like all sorts of different personalities, right? There's the business side.
In opera,
Directional
no,
side.
not at all. There are no personalities in opera ever.
Nothing but.
No, yeah, it's very, very much, that.
I bet. Well, yeah, I think you guys could probably monetize like a little reality show to show people how that actually works behind the scenes, because I would find that really, really interesting. Okay, so with a lot of organizations that require people to spend money and sit in seats and kind of become fans, it's important that there's continuity over generations, right?
Sure.
We were talking a little bit before we jumped in here. I was lucky enough that my parents took me to symphonies and operas.
That's great.
And I'll plan on doing the same thing with my kids. And I'm not sure I would if I wasn't exposed to it when I was a kid.
Right.
Right. It's probably a lot easier to keep me going than to get somebody net new.
We
right?
call it a formative experience. And yes, those are so important to the audiences of the next generation.
Yeah. And what's interesting is if you picked 5 people off the street, they'd be, oh, it's in Latin or Italian and, you know, right? And it's 400 years old. And those are beautiful.
And it's long.
Long.
Yeah.
You know, even when I was a kid, I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that intermission's not the end.
Yeah. Oh,
Right?
yeah. We've got, with Wagner, we've still got 6 more hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So luckily, I still loved it.
I
enough, right?
apologize to the Wagnerites out there. Okay.
But the cool thing about what you guys have built here with the revolution of Steve Jobs is it's timely, right?
Indeed.
And you're lucky, obviously, it's name recognition with him, but pretty much everyone in the audience will relate to it, right? Whether it was their first Mac or the phone they have in their pocket, they'll relate to garages and the clothes they're wearing, right?
Yeah.
All of this. So this is, it seems like an attempt from y'all's industry to like put your fangs into a new generation with the end goal of, you know, these kids or these young adults being like, that was awesome. Maybe I should look at some more. Is that accurate?
I think so.
Absolutely. I mean, like, nothing pleases me more than to see people who do not look like me, older white guy in the audience with me. It really pleases me. This opera is attracting younger audiences. It's attracting people who have never been to an opera before. And one of the reasons is because of Mason's electronic, really exciting. It's just like pulsing music. It's music that you might hear in a club, but it's in an opera house and it's sung by opera singers, beautiful singers. Another reason is because the production by Thomas Woolen is spectacular. It is what you would need to see by a man as innovative as Steve Jobs was. And it matches exactly the world that Steve Jobs lived in. We have a garage, you know, and we have 2 stoner, Steve Woz and Steve Jobs, stoner kids, not realizing that they were about ready to change the world. They're just getting high and having some kind of cool ideas and talking about girls and everything like that. And suddenly they're thinking about changing how they can change the world the way, you know, I mean, minus the stoner bit, maybe, but every entrepreneur certainly has that sort of beginning. Yeah,
absolutely. It is very fascinating, the corollaries. Before we get too far down, let's make sure we cover like the brass tacks. So, Christopher, this will run from what day and the location?
Sure. Happy to talk about that. We open on May 6th. And have subsequent performances on the 8th, 10th, 12th, and 14th. Those all happen at the Janet Quinney Lawson Capitol Theater downtown. And the first 4 are evening performances, and the last one is a matinee 2:00 performance. Janet Quinney Lawson Capitol Theater, of course, is a longtime home of Utah opera. So,
very cool.
And I wanted to build a little bit, if I can go off script just a second here, but connect to what Mark said. As I describe this piece and the attraction and the power of the piece is the word contemporary keeps coming to mind, and we overuse that word, and it's ironic because in years to come, some of the things that make this contemporary are also going to date the piece as well. but at least for the moment, we can call it that. But we have a contemporary character of sorts. We all know who Steve Jobs was. We all remember what he looks like, and he's well represented in this, along with the Woz and Chrisanne and Lorene and all the people who surrounded him. We also have contemporary sounds. So while we often think about opera as being the classical orchestra, there's acoustic guitar, there's electric guitar, there's contemporary band percussion instruments. There's even a Mac computer making sounds in the orchestra.
Wow.
As part of the overall oral experience. Everybody is on a microphone for this, which is something that usually this traditionalist is totally against, but it's perfect for this piece. So the entire oral sound experience is being mixed through a board and coming through speakers, much like any other concert that we would go to today. And even the visual presentation is using contemporary, up-to-date visual methods. There's 26 different LCD screens on stage, and then we have rear projection and projection coming from the house on top of it all. We have a million lights going on and moving on stage. There's even in the beginning a live video feed for one of the presentations we see Steve Jobs doing. So in some ways, we're bringing the contemporary, the modern concert experience into the opera house. So everything's recognizable in this. And in an art form that so often can be misconstrued as being something that's totally unrecognizable.
Yeah. Well put. That's not your grandma's opera.
No,
right?
and it's in English, but not only English, American English.
Yeah.
So.
Which is a good form of English, if you ask
yes,
me.
I do. It's fine with me. I use it every day.
Yeah, me too. I don't use it well, but
I'm still struggling. Yeah.
That sounds awesome, and also a lot of work, right? Like the visionaries, and then you're going to need the technical folks and the stage hands, all of that, right?
Absolutely. More technical people involved than we usually use to create something, for sure.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the syndicate of opera houses across America.
Right.
So this will then move on to the next city?
Yeah, actually, we're part of a consortium, a collaborative group of 5 different opera companies for this particular production. Utah Opera, just because of the way scheduling works, is actually the 5th of the 5 companies to bring it to their community. We have expectations that this production and with the piece will continue to live on. The original production that premiered at Santa Fe Opera is already scheduled. It's at San Francisco, I think.
San Francisco Opera in September.
Yeah.
Cool.
So it's a piece that has had such amazing response that it is making its way throughout the country.
Yeah.
I feel very lucky as a librettist because I have a number of operas that seem to resonate with an audience. And I think that's mostly because of the great composers I get to work with. And so this is one of them. This is somehow entering the modern repertory, and not many operas get that opportunity. There are a lot of new operas are being created, but they have one production and they die. This has already had like 6, 7, 8, something like that. So it's obviously reaching the audience, and that makes me very happy.
Yeah. If it continues to reach the audience and it's garnering, like, there is cold hard math with all of this. There's the business side.
Right.
This could go for years and years, correct?
Yep. Yep.
Very cool. So theoretically, like, it could travel all the way around America several times and
go to Europe.
Yeah.
Which I'd like, because I like a free trip to Europe. So
they got to have you there.
Yeah.
Right. One more question there for you, Mark. How did you get into this? How does one get into this field?
It's a very strange field. It's a very specialized. To be a librettist is a very specialized job. And when I started doing it back in 2000, there was no training for librettists. I come from like Broadway, and I was a Broadway lyricist. And then a composer named John Musto, a really brilliant composer, asked me in 2000 to write my first opera. And I did it basically listening to the works of Stephen Sondheim. I credit Sondheim, who, as you probably know, wrote Sweeney Todd and some of the greatest works of the theater. I credit his work with everything I know about opera, not with any. And Christopher had spoken earlier about, like, my knowledge of old opera. It is terrible. It's nothing. don't ever ask me a question about old opera because I really don't know. I know everything about contemporary opera, and I don't know everything about contemporary opera. I know enough about contemporary opera so that I can continue to write it and reach audiences, and that's all I care about.
Interesting. I did have a question, which would be your favorite opera to go to?
For me?
Yeah.
My favorite opera is Sweeney Todd.
Sweeney Todd.
Actually, yeah. Or one of mine. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. I'm joking.
What about
Revolutionist Steve Jobs? No.
There you go. What about you, Christopher?
An occupational hazard is that I can find something I love about almost everything that I see. So I don't really have a favorite. The list of favorites would be too long to mention. I can be joyous in a production of The Marriage of Figaro by Mozart. I am a Wagner fan, so I'm okay with 6 hours in the opera house for a night. But I am passionate about especially American contemporary works. I think that's where the future of our art form is. And frankly, I think it needs to be in the hands of people who don't have connection necessarily to the older works. I think this art form, it's 400 plus years old, and it lives and breathes by evolving along with the human experience. So long live opera.
Yeah, absolutely. Forgive me for not knowing this. This is, you can bring your kids or not?
This is someone, I would say probably teenagers and older is best. It does touch, because of who Steve Jobs is, on a couple of adult ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, part of the greatness of this piece is it explores Steve Jobs, the one that we celebrate, and Steve Jobs, the one that we try not necessarily to emulate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think you could do an opera about a boring person, right? Like, there's just no.
You can't.
tagline.
I don't think you can also. I would say you cannot do an opera about a strictly evil person.
Yeah.
Even I can tell you, when I have to write a character that is on the dark side of things, I have to understand her or him in some way. You can't write truthfully if you don't understand. And I think this opera does a really good job, mostly through the music and the production, of presenting Steve Jobs as a human being who had lots of faults, who strove for perfection, but had a hell of a lot of imperfection in his own life. And this is about him basically learning on the eve of death to understand that human beings are imperfect. We get sick. We don't always make the best choices. And I think that's sort of the journey in this opera.
Yeah.
That was a great line from Lorraine, humans are messy.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great encapsulation of it.
Whereas Steve Jobs was about creating a computer that was anything but messy, that was completely clean. One button on, one button off. Like that was that's why he did that. You don't see any wires. You don't see how it works. It's this beautiful, clean machine. And that's one reason why I think he was so successful. He also democratized the computer. He made it friendly for people. And there is a big aria, a big song in the opera about how the computer is just like an instrument we play. It's like a violin or a piano or a drum. We have to have that relationship with the computer. And that's where I think Apple really succeeded in that vision. Whether that success has made us better human beings, I don't know. I won't be around long enough to know, and that's okay. But that's what he strove for, strove to create. And I think he succeeded at that.
Yeah. Well, when the opera's here in Salt Lake, there'll be people taking pictures with their, I always call it the Steve Jobs magic phone, right?
That's right.
Yes, exactly.
So this will be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
you know what? It is a lot of fun. That's one thing I want to stress. This is an opera that's a lot of fun. And it's funny and it's sad and it's moving, but it's not, I don't think it's ever boring.
Yeah. Guaranteed, I can say this with 100% confidence. It's probably a lot more fun than what people will be doing on a normal night, where they could be at the revolution of Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Right?
Urge your audience to have an abnormal night. Go to the opera.
Yep. Go stimulate the economy a little bit. Surprise your wife, surprise your husband. It's just
and
win-win.
your children, the teenagers, how you started. It is important for culture to continue opera, and the only way that's going to happen is with stories like this. And and also to continue American stories. We're in such a divided country right now, and culture is going to help us get back together and figure out how we can move forward as a country.
Absolutely.
And that's one reason it's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not many things that can do that, but I think, symphonies and operas are one of them.
Yeah,
for sure. And I've started to play some opera and symphony music to my kids. They're young.
Good for you.
And you can see like through their eyes and body language, like this is different, but I feel like it's more in their DNA than rap or hip hop or rock, right? Because it's melodic.
In your DNA, so therefore you're continuing through the traditions. So bless you for doing that.
Oh yeah. Well,
I wouldn't be writing opera if my parents had not brought home The Sound of Music and put it on the stereo, as we used to call them back then.
Yeah.
Or my mother had not said, you seem to like music. I'm going to start you on piano lessons at age 6.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah. It's
so important. And I think we learned during the pandemic how important live theater and live music is.
Yeah.
When we are deprived of it, we see its value.
Absolutely.
So
you guys have chosen it as your livelihood. You're all in. I have not, but I still appreciate it. And I'm willing to fork out money and, continually like promote this because it's a net positive for the entire society. Win, lose, or draw, like it needs to be there and people need to go. And on that note, we will have in the description and on social media discount code for Silicon Slopes members and partners. That'll be in the newsletter. So our aim is to get our core audience there because as far as operas and Silicon Slopes go, this is the best synergy we've ever had.
Oh, good.
I wish we could go on for hours and hours because I have genuine curiosity.
Oh, by the way, this opera is an hour and a half.
Hour and a half, 90 minutes.
Without an intermission. So you're in, you see a great story, and you're out. You can probably even go to dinner, at least
there you go.
If you want to, go for a drink afterwards. But it's not a long opera.
But it sounds like you'll be stimulated and having a riot the entire time, so it'll go by quick. A lot of standing ovations, hopefully. All right. Thank you so much, Christopher. Thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time to join us. We've been partners with y'all in various forms for years and years. Hope to continue to do that because it is a critical part of our little ecosystem here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Thank you,
Garrett.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.